Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. My name is Dave, and today's guest is Willem Middelkoop. He is the founder of the Commodity Discovery Fund and is a writer. Willem predicted the onset of the credit crisis in the first book, When the Dollar Falls. That was back in 2007. And he wrote The Big Reset in 2014. He is the owner of the BigResetBlog.com, and I would like to welcome him to the X22 Report Spotlight. And just to let everyone know, all the links here are going to be at the bottom of the video, and you can find all his information on the Big Reset blog. Welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight, Willem.
Well, thanks for having me on. And I'm also a fund manager based in Holland, and I have my own resource gold fund, Commodity Discovery Fund.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
I wanted to go down the list here of what has been happening in the economy, but I wanted to start off with the Fed. And I know that you have your book, The Big Reset, and you talk a lot about the Fed, the founding fathers, and different articles. And I wanted to know, is the Fed something here in the United States that the founding fathers actually wanted? Did they want a central banking system?
Well, if you study the history of banking in the US, you find out that there's not a wonderful relationship between the citizens of the US and central bankers. Bankers have tried to start central banks in the US several times. The first two failed quite quickly. Actually, central banks were disliked by the American public. So when New York bankers were trying to set up the Federal Reserve, this really was a plan. This was really planned by Wall Street bankers in 1912. And they really had to convince the public and politicians that the US could benefit of a central bank, but they tried to avoid the word central bank. And that's why at the start of the Federal Reserve in 1913, nobody mentioned the word central bank. So it was sold to the public, and it was sold in Washington as a reserve system, a pool of reserves. And when on Christmas Eve, December 1913, the Federal Reserve Act came into effect, many Americans only found out a few months or even a few years later that the US had a new central bank.
Let me ask you, does the Fed actually help the economy in any way? I mean, is there any benefit to it? What is the reason they did this?
The problem I have with the Federal Reserve that this was all planned by the bankers themselves, and they proposed the plan, the Federal Reserve Act, which was set up to deceive the public. You know, they didn't tell them they would start a central bank, and they didn't tell the public the Federal Reserve Act would give U.S. bankers, actually Wall Street bankers, a monopoly on the creation of the dollar. And in the process, they also more or less stole the U.S. gold reserves, which President Roosevelt took back in 1933. So there always has been an atmosphere of hiding the truth, and well, that's how we know. How we know New York bankers. They always try to make a little bit more profit out of a system for themselves.
Why, back in the 70s, why did the Fed decide, okay, we had enough where the dollar was pegged to gold? Why did they decouple the dollar from the gold back in the 70s? What was the point of that?
Well, as you might know, we had a reset of the worldwide monetary system in 1944, at the end of the Second World War. The US Treasury had been planning to introduce a new dollar system since 1942, 1943. They invited the ministers of finance and central bank governors from 44 countries to come to Bretton Woods. And in the Bretton Woods conference, there were two proposals on the table. One by Mr. Keynes from Great Britain. He advised to start a new financial system with a new currency, the Bancor. It was a brand new currency. It wasn't related to any particular country. But the US came with their own proposal, and their proposal was to start with the dollar system. The dollar system would be much more convenient than the old gold system. And after the US promised that gold would back the dollar, that the dollar would be as good as gold, there was an agreement in Bretton Woods after days of conference that the new system would be structured around the dollar. Because the US promised that every dollar was backed by gold, many countries in Europe, especially in the 60s, were exchanging surplus dollars into gold. And US experienced quite a strong outflow of gold in the late 60s, and that's why President Nixon was advised by his advisors in August 1971 that he should break his promise from 1944, or break the US promise from 1944 that the dollar was as good as gold. So that was the reason why why the gold-dollar connection was broken in 71.
Does the Fed like gold, or do they dislike gold?
Well, since 1971, the dollar was disconnected from gold, and from that moment on, gold became enemy number one, actually, for the U.S. For American bankers. And we've seen quite a bit of, they have put quite a bit of energy into demonizing gold. And if you study my book, I have a full chapter, I think it's 40, 50 pages, titled The War on Gold, with all the examples of Wall Street and the US Federal Reserve together with the White House, really working hard to move gold out of the financial system.
Do you think right now, as of today, do you think that gold is manipulated?
Well, I'm an investor myself, and if we study supply and demand for gold and silver, we have a situation now in which the physical demand from China is 2,500 tons. The physical demand from India is 1,000 tons. So yearly physical demand out of these two countries is 3,500 tons. Worldwide, annual worldwide gold production from all mines is less than 3,000 tons. So you can't have fundamentals like this and a gold price going down for 4 years. So that makes us quite sure that the gold price is being managed, is being manipulated. I think in my book I give quite a bit of evidence regarding this manipulation of the gold price, and I think it's only a question of time. I think we're in the last inning now of this correction in gold, which has been going on for 4 years, and I think we can expect a strong move up in the coming years. And for silver, I see silver advancing even more than gold in the next few years.
I mean, you mentioned China and Russia, and they're purchasing quite a bit of gold. Any reason why you think they're purchasing so much gold right now?
I think China and Russia, they started to accumulate gold right off the start of the credit crisis. So they were alarmed by the credit crisis. I think the start of the credit crisis told them that the Wall Street was in disarray, that the US dollar system, which was built from 1944 on, and which was reset in 1971, that China and Russia are aware of the major problems in the system. They know the monetary system needs a reset, whatever that may be. They both want a successor for the dollar as the world reserve currency. China is very much in favor to use the SDR, the special drawing rights by the IMF. And I think China and Russia both are preparing themselves for the next phase of the international financial system. And gold has been used time and again to rebalance and restabilize the system. And I think this has occurred dozens of times in the last few hundred years, and it will happen again. And so it's a sign on the wall when huge countries and important countries like China and Russia are accumulating these amounts of gold.
China and Russia are accumulating. Do you think the U.S. is accumulating, and do you think they have gold?
Yeah, that's the big question. You know, there hasn't been a full audit of Fort Knox since I think the 50s, and I just read a great research report by a fellow Dutchman, Koos Janssen, who has actually spoken to one of the auditors of Fort Knox. And auditing is being done by looking through a window in a door and counting the bars. So nobody knows how many tons of gold are still in U.S. official gold reserves. I don't think U.S. is accumulating gold. If we study gold flows, you can look at documents provided by customs in several countries. We see a lot of gold flowing from west to east. A lot of this gold travels via Switzerland. In Switzerland, there are the big gold refineries. They melt the gold and produce new 1 kilo bars. Actually, 1 kilo bars. That's the standard for Chinese warehouses. So we see a lot of gold moving from west to east.
So let me ask you right now, I mean, the stock market, I mean, every day we see crazy things happening in Asia, Europe, the United States, and the stock market is, one day it's way down, the next day it's up, the next day it's down, and we're seeing a lot of fluctuations just since this August, actually. What do you think is happening right now in the market?
Yeah, the higher volatility can be explained because of we've reached the end of QE3 last year. After collapse of central banks have created an awful lot of money out in there. Central banks' balance sheet have grown by 10 trillion. The balance sheet of central banks. Total debt has grown by over 50 trillion just since 2008. And we have seen a recovery of most economies since late 2008 and early 2009. And after the recovery of the most important economies, of course, the cooling down of the Chinese economy makes everybody a little nervous. And because the Federal Reserve has stopped its QE program, QE3, everybody is now a little anxious and waiting what will happen next. But I think central bankers, they will start QE4 quite soon. And there's even quite a bit of talks now among insiders. Central banks, they might be tempted to introduce QE for the people. So not only for the financial institutions, but maybe putting more money directly into the system. So I expect much more money will be created in the foreseeable future. And that's why I'm quite convinced that commodities and especially precious metals like gold and silver, which can't be printed, they will rise in currency terms over time.
So we're going to see what you're saying. We're going to see a flood of new currency hitting the banks and the everyday person on the street.
I wouldn't be surprised when major economies will start large infrastructural projects to invest money really into the economy, creating jobs, building infrastructure. China is very in favor of this. I think U.S. needs it. The infrastructural situation in the U.S. is, I think you know this better than I do from Europe. But, there's no high-speed rail network in the U.S. And I think, those kind of investments could really be helpful to jumpstart the economy again, and the same counts for Europe.
So do you think that, I mean, you're just saying by creating, I mean, if they do this and there's more currency in the system, Isn't this going to make prices go up? Like aren't we going to see inflation then?
Well, that's always a risk, but I think the general public is reacting rather calm after 6-7 years of highly inflationary QE operations. But because the velocity of money has been dropping the velocity of money has dropped quite a bit. So we don't see all this money really circulating into the economy and really sending prices up. But this may be the reason why central bankers are convinced that they can push QE to a higher level without risking starting a hyperinflationary cycle.
So let me ask you, you wrote the book, The Big Reset. I mean, when you wrote this, do you still, back in 2014, do you still see a huge reset coming?
Oh yeah, that's quite certain. There's only one problem with the title. When I say The Big Reset, people tend to think this is a binary option, it's a binary system, so on one Sunday in 2019 will be reset. Of course, it's always possible that in the G20 decision, major changes can be put into effect overnight, but a monetary reset in which there's a debt restructuring, in which a new world reserve currency system is being planned. This also can be executed in several steps during a period of 5 to 10 years. But it's quite certain for me that within the next 5 to 10, 15 years, major changes will occur into the financial system. And if you study my blog, I give you enough proof that insiders have held secret talks on the next phase of the new financial system. And I think even insiders still don't know how everything will evolve, but it's quite certain that the special drawn rights, the SDR, the IMF money will be used in the future in a way to be a successor for the dollar.
I mean, if we do see this reset, I mean, what would like the everyday person experience when this occurs?
When all goes well, I think the average person isn't affected that much, because the chances are high that the euro will be the currency in Europe. The dollar will stay to be the currency in the US. But on top of these national and regional currencies, we might get an extra layer in which a supranational currency like the SDR may be used for international as a meaning. We could use it as a way to settle trade internationally, and I think for ordinary people, not too much will need to change when we're lucky.
And what happens when we're unlucky?
Yeah, there's always a possibility that that the major trading partners in this world can't reach an agreement on the next phase of the monetary system, and then we could have two blocks, one in the west and one in the east. We see China and Russia, working together and pressuring the West to change the system. And if no agreement could be made, things can get messy, and we could even end up in a situation where we have a large conflict. We could have a situation where Russia could choose to introduce a gold-backed ruble. So many things can go wrong in the process. But I think China, they hold the keys. China has a very strong opinion, and they express this time and again that they seek cooperation or confrontation. So China really wants to cooperate with the IMF and with the US to transform this system in a very well managed way. The Chinese, they want to have a very stable economy. The Chinese, they don't want to have a risk on social disturbances in their own country. So I think the Chinese, they really hold the key.
Right now, the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. I mean, it's backed by oil,
Yeah.
basically.
Well, no, well,
the petrodollar.
There's a connection through the petrodollar deal.
Right. So if we have this reset, what happens to the petrodollar at that point?
This is an important question. John Kerry, Secretary of State, he has stated in an interview that it is essential that the US Senate approves the Iran deal, because if there's no Iran deal, the dollar might lose its status as the world's reserve currency. That's what he stated in an interview. So that tells you that there's a huge pressure on the US at this moment to give in. Otherwise, the forces in the Middle East, they might drop the dollar as the currency in which for which they sell their oil. And when the dollar isn't used anymore as the currency to settle trades in commodities and in oil, I think that will be the end of the current dollar system. So this is why China and the IMF are working so hard to make the SDR ready to be able to use the SDR as a successor to the dollar when things go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people out there, they're talking about like a breakdown of the entire system. And a lot of people saying this is what we're seeing in the markets right now because everything is overvalued and, you know, everything right now is starting to break down. Do you see that happening? Like where we have so much debt in the world, so much money creation that this whole system, it just can't continue on like this?
Well, of course, there is a risk. And this was also the reason why things, when things started to unravel late 2008. But then authorities were surprised by the panic. And I always tell during speeches that at that time, the fire brigade, the fire trucks were still, they weren't on the street, and now it's a totally different situation. Worldwide, all systems have been built to react immediately if there are signs of a panic, and central banks can grow their balance sheets without any limits. So when there's a need to, they really can be the big buyer into the markets. And actually that's what we've seen in the last few years already. So I think panics can be solved quite easily, and but things are unstable, and at one point they could lose control, and then we have a major problem. But it's important to understand that worldwide, I think everybody agrees that we need to stabilize the system, and the Chinese work together with the Japanese and work together with the ECB and with the Federal Reserve. So everybody has the same is reaching for the same goal.
I mean, the ECB, the Fed, they're all talking about interest rates, and they're talking about increasing interest rates. Then on the other hand, they're talking about negative interest rates. Yeah. I mean, if they raise interest rates, is that going to be a problem?
They won't. They
won't raise interest rates whatsoever.
No. When a system is loaded with too much debt, higher interest rates will kill you. So this is a totally different situation than the late 70s. I think we'll see more unorthodox monetary policies in the next few years. Negative interest rates could be one of them. In this system, everything can be changed. There are no natural laws. There are no laws of physics who say you can't do this or that. So I think the monetary madness will become even worse in the next few years. And I really think we'll have one, two more moves up first. So now there's the markets are nervous now, but I think many investors understand that government bonds and cash are risky positions. When you are wealthy, you shouldn't own too many bonds, and you shouldn't have too much cash. So the wealthy, the smart money is investing, is moving into real estate, into everything tangible, and can be gold and can even be stocks, because stocks in a inflationary or hyperinflationary scenario, stocks are safe havens. Look what happened in Zimbabwe. Look what happened in the Weimar Republic in 1922 in Germany. If you were invested in stocks, you were safe.
Why does the central banks continually tell us that they're going to be raising interest rates then?
Because they have to pretend all is fine. So if all is fine and the economy is doing well, you need to raise rates. So if they would say we won't raise rates for the next few years, they will send the message that not all is well. But I think now everybody understands not all is well, and of course there's a risk that countries like Brazil and China are now cooling down. But I really think this is temporary, and I really expect stock markets to go up again, and they can go up quite violently, because more and more investors will sell bond holdings and will start to increase their equity holdings. And we've seen the same among institutional investors in Japan.
But I mean, the Japan, their market did go up, but now it's dropping once again.
Yeah, but once this stabilizes, we could have another big run, because there's so much money in the system, and bonds, especially Japanese bonds, that's a buck in search of a windscreen, is accident waiting to happen. So more and more money will flee towards asset classes which are more or less safe havens for a world in which too much money is created.
For the last question here, from this point on, moving out, 2-3 years, what do you see happening?
Well, as said, I think markets will stabilize. China will stabilize. We might have one more big, violent, strong move up, especially in equities, in real estate. And then we can have a serious crisis before 2020, in a few years' time, in which we really see we'll see the major changes coming into the system. And I think there will be a strong move up in precious metals. That's why we invest in precious metals and other commodities. And well, it will be interesting times.
Okay, Willem, thank you for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. I really appreciate you coming on here and giving us all this information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.